Welcome to our Bible study on 1 Samuel. We are going to finish chapter 14 today, so make sure to pause this video, go read chapter 14, and then come back. Last week we talked about Jonathan's bravery in the battle against the Philistines. He and his right-hand man sneak into the Philistine camp. But the way they do this, they actually know that they're going to be spotted. So it's not that great of a sneaky entrance. Jonathan basically knows that the Philistines are going to respond in one of two ways when they are spotted. Either the Philistines will say, "Wait there until we come to you," and they're going to stay where they are and not go up to them. But if the Philistines say, "Come up to us," then they're going to climb up, because that will be our sign, according to Jonathan, that the Lord has given them into our hands. Apparently, there's something about the taunt, "Come up to us," that shows that the Philistines are arrogant and proud, and they think they have the battle sewn up. And so Jonathan believes that they're proud, then the Lord humbles the proud. And that's exactly what happens. The Philistines mock Jonathan and his armor bearer. That's when he knows God has given them into his hands. And so God throws the whole Philistine camp into a panic, and basically the enemies of Israel self-destruct. God has done this before in the Old Testament, and he'll do it again. He sends a panic upon the enemies, and they start attacking each other. Now, the irony is that King Saul is not with Jonathan right now. This is not a part of any kind of grand plan. He realizes something odd is going on in the Philistine camp, but he doesn't know. He's clueless. So he asks Ahijah, one of the priests, to bring the Ark of God to him. Now, at the very least, Saul has the presence of mind to consult God about what he should do next. We never actually see the Ark of the Covenant brought into his presence, which is interesting. What we do see is the high priest consults the Urim and the Thummim. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, so maybe someone could correct me. But here's the thing. The high priests would wear an ephod, and this was a priestly garment that they would wear over their chest and over their body. And these objects, the Urim and the Thummim, are very mysterious, but it seems to be kind of a yes or no answer from God. So someone would stand before the high priest, they would ask a very short and sweet question, which Saul does later, and then it would be yes or no. The high priest would put his hand into the ephod and draw out one of these stones. And so if he got the Urim, it would be yes, or Thummim, no. Or vice versa. It's not exactly clear. Whatever else you think about this practice, it may seem like divination or something prohibited in the Torah, but this is actually a prescribed practice in the Torah, and it happens multiple times. However, Saul stops the process of consulting Yahweh and says, "Withdraw your hand." So it seems that the high priest Ahijah had put his hand into the ephod, and he was about to do it, but Saul says, "Withdraw your hand," and he doesn't do it. Instead of consulting the Lord, again, they join the battle because it's getting out of hand. The Philistines are on the run. They join them in hot pursuit, but there's a problem. Even though the Philistines are in a panic and they're killing each other, even though the battle seems to be turning in favor of the Israelites are exhausted. And whose fault is that? It is Saul's fault. He puts them under an oath saying, "Cursed be anyone who eats food before evening comes, before I have avenged myself on my enemies." So none of the troops ate. Now, the problem is the entire army is entering into the woods. They're searching after the Philistines, and they're seeing honey. And they don't eat the honey because they're afraid of the oath. Now, remember, God said that the promised land would flow with milk and honey, and King Saul is preventing his own soldiers, the Israelites, from enjoying the land and its honey. So the whole point of the conquest, that God would provide a home of safety and provision for his people, Saul is preventing that. He's putting an obstacle in front of that. Now, Jonathan didn't hear about the oath, and he wants to strengthen himself because he's a soldier fighting a battle. So he eats some of the honey and is given new strength. Now, Jonathan is not doing what Adam and Eve did, eating of forbidden fruit that's prohibited by God. This is something he's doing despite the fact that his father has created a foolish curse to prevent his soldiers from enjoying the plunder of their battle. So, and Jonathan himself actually says this. He says, "My father has made trouble for the country. See how my eyes brighten when I tasted just a little bit of this honey. How much better it would have been if the men had eaten today." So the curse of Saul actually leads to desperate soldiers who end up, when they're in the middle of the battle, they start butchering these animals and eating them with their blood. And by following their king's curse or oath, they end up starved. And so what they end up doing is breaking a rule given all the way back in Noah's age, where God says, do not eat the lifeblood of the animals. So Saul's curse, Saul's oath that he puts everyone under, actually ends up in their sin and downfall because of their starvation. They're hungry soldiers, and Saul won't even let them eat. So Saul offers a sacrifice to forgive their sins. He's kind of acting as a priest, but a priest steps up and says, before we go further, let's inquire of God again, because Saul, by the way, you interrupted that process. And so Saul goes again, and he asks a very blunt, straightforward question to God, and God is silent. God doesn't respond to him. And here's the thing. We may dislike the fact that the Lord is silent and doesn't respond to Saul's question, but the fact of the matter is that Saul silenced the Lord first. Earlier on in this very same chapter, he's consulting the Lord. The high priest is putting his hand into the ephod to bring out the Urim and Thummim, but Saul says, withdraw your hand. And so because Saul silenced the Lord is silent for Saul right here. God doesn't speak. Now, Saul concludes there must be a sinner in the camp because God is being silent. This must be someone else's fault. And so he divides all of the army and him and Jonathan on two sides. Now, here's the thing that continues to happen in this story. People keep saying to Saul, do what seems best to you. And that phrase can go a number of different ways. Sometimes you might say that to someone who is trustworthy and wise. I think in this situation, they are not giving him real advice or real wisdom or counsel. They're not even affirming his wisdom. These are just sycophantic yes men, or maybe they're just afraid that they don't want to contradict Saul because they know who he is. And I think this is a call back to the time of the judges, when we see over and over, there was no king in Israel, so everyone did what was right in their eyes. Now, once Saul splits up, the army on one side and Saul and Jonathan on the other, they cast lots and it lands on Jonathan. And Saul thinks in his self-righteous way, I have discovered who is the sinner in the camp, the troubler in the camp. But the sad thing is that Saul is the troubler in the camp. He is the one who's causing all these problems. It's not Jonathan. Jonathan is the one who was strong in the Lord and ate the honey of the promised land and who trusted God in battle. When Saul stands up all high and mighty and says, Jonathan, what have you done? He's trying to act like a prophet, calling out someone else's sin. In reality, it shows that what Jonathan has done is he's delivered the Philistines, the Lord has delivered the Philistines into his hand. In fact, Saul is actually being depicted much like Jephthah from the book of Judges. Jephthah is the one who made a very rash vow to sacrifice whatever he saw when he went home, and his daughter is the first one he sees. And so Saul is now making a vow, a rash vow that could end up in the death of his son Jonathan. But the army actually comes to Jonathan's defense. They counter-vow Saul. Saul says that surely as the Lord lives, you, Jonathan, must die. But the army says, should Jonathan die? He who has brought us this great deliverance? Never, as surely as the Lord lives, not a hair of his head will fall to the ground. So the army of the king rescues Jonathan from the king, and he's not put to death. Now, despite all of Saul's sins, it is true that Saul is a successful warrior. We see that he assumes rule over Israel and he fights against Moab and the Ammonites and Edom and the kings of Zobah and the Philistines. And wherever he turns, he inflicts punishment on them. He fights valiantly and defeats the Amalekites. And this is what God promised to do through Saul. So even though this story is full of Saul's failures and we are seeing his decline throughout the story, there are still ways that God is giving him success against his enemies. He is a Joshua-like warrior. He is defeating the enemies of Israel. God is working through this very fallen king, even as we know that there are failures, and we're going to see those failures increase, and it's going to, eventually go to free fall. Just a few characters to watch out for that are mentioned at the end. We're told about Saul's younger daughter, Michal, Michal, and she's going to come up in the story of David, and then we're told about the name of the commander of Saul's army, Abner, and we'll see him return as well. Here are some questions to consider for this Bible study. The oath of Saul to force his soldiers to fast was intended to inspire them to victory so that they would be able to eat afterwards. Leaders often call people to make great sacrifices in the hope that they would pursue their goals with urgency. But in each case, it backfires. How can our efforts to call people to sacrificial discipleship also backfire? Go back and compare the stories of Jephthah in Judges 11 and Saul in 1 Samuel 14. What similarities and differences do you see? And what do they teach us about the vows and promises we make? Third, what times have you stopped consulting God just like Saul did? What has happened because you stopped asking what God wanted and did what you thought was urgent? I hope this Bible study is a blessing to you today.